All right, Rand, we have made our way through the AFC South. Now we're turning our attention to burning questions for the AFC North. First up, the Cleveland Browns, a team that started off pretty strong on draft weekend, traded down from 2 to 5, got an extra first-round pick from the Jaguars. Things seem to be falling into place. They got Mason Graham. They got Carson Schlesinger at the top of the second round. They drafted some running backs. Quinshon Judkins was the first one to go. Then Sampson out of Tennessee. Then they took 2 quarterbacks. But one thing they didn't take position-wise was a wide receiver, and we'd identified that as a huge need for weeks and probably months. So I'll ask you, whoever the quarterback ends up being, from Joe Flacco to Kenny Pickett to Dillon to Shador, how are you going to fix the wide receiver position? Because these rookie quarterbacks potentially were thrown to better quarterbacks in college their final year than outside of Jerry Jeudy in terms of guys being able to get open consistently in the NFL. So what's the thinking process here?
This is one where you're going to have to, continue to monitor what's available to you on the street. There are going to be some, solid receivers here, veteran receivers that are available to you on the street. I actually went back the last couple of nights and just kind of looked at all the players that are available on the street. And it's actually a pretty good list. So you can still find some help there. And as we just talked about in the previous segment, maybe Andrew Berry wants to call Nick Caserio and trade for one of those, receivers that they have there. But you have to find Jerry Jeudy some help. I think Jerry Jeudy led the team with over 90 catches last year. And I think the next best leading wide receiver in the room may have had 29 catches. So that's just a huge disparity there in the room. And you have to find a way to fix it. You signed Deontay Johnson, which, Deontay, from being a former Steeler, he is a good player. However, I question, can you trust him just based off of how his last 2 stops in Carolina and Baltimore and how those things turned out? Can you trust him to be a guy to help that room? So I don't know that. I think there's still a lot of questions there for the wide receiver position.
Yep, Jerry Jeudy obviously is who he is. Seth Tillman and Jamari Thrash are currently listed as the starters. They do have David Bell, who they drafted a few years ago out of Purdue. And, of course, they have David Njoku in the last year of his deal. They did draft Harold Fannin Jr., who you can just use essentially in the slot if you want to as a move tight end. But he's not going to threaten anyone down the field consistently, even though he's a big body target. And the Deontay Johnson thing I'll mention, they signed him to, I think, a 1-year deal. No guaranteed money. So that screams to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong as a former GM, that we're not trusting you until you show us that you can be trusted type situation.
100%. And the fact that the deal has no guarantees. Now, again, he's a veteran, so if he's on the roster week 1, then his salary becomes fully guaranteed.
Okay.
So, but again, and I actually like the fact that they structured the deal that way. Your money becomes guaranteed when you make this team. So therefore, you have to make this team. So now he has that proverbial carrot in front of him that he has to get to.
And the thing is, he's not even 30 years old, and he's an incredible route runner when he's locked in. And just getting him locked in is the big issue. My burning question, which is potentially the most predictable burning question ever asked, in football or otherwise, who is QB1 and QB2 and QB3 in Cleveland? Because we know currently Deshaun Watson probably won't play. He may never play again in Cleveland, but they do have Joe Flacco, who they signed. They traded for Kenny Pickett, the 2 veterans on the roster, and they drafted Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, and then 2 rounds later they took Shador Sanders. We were at that pro day, or showcase as it was called. So we'll find out together, but it sounds like Shador's doing and saying all the right things. He's in Cleveland. He's got himself a gym. He's gotten the playbook, I believe. And then all you can do is do what's in front of you in terms of mini camps. And as a GM, what are you looking for in mini camps from the rookie quarterbacks in particular? In this case, there'll be 2 in Dillon and Shador that Andrew Berry will be watching closely.
You're just looking to see how well they're picking up the offense, what type of command they have, and then how are they running the huddle. And those are the things that you're typically looking at. Now, you get to see the real test when the veterans are out there and how they move and how they go about their business, once the veterans are in the building. Because right now in rookie minicamp, you have 20 to 30 some guys that none of them really know what they're doing. And so it could be a little bit of a cluster sometimes, but you just want to see out of these 2 positions, particularly these 2 guys that have the experience they have, is what type of command they have and how well are they picking up the offense.
All right. Yeah, we'll find out. It'll be fun, certainly, to see how it unfolds. And all right, who's the week 1 starter in Cleveland?
I would just hedge my bet and say Joe Flacco.
I think that's right.
just because of familiarity and having been there, him having been in the system already, he has a step ahead. So I would say Joe Flacco for week 1.
Week 12.
Ooh. Week 12, I'll say Shador by week 12.
Okay. All right. You had to think about it, but it's going to be interesting. Say what you want about the Browns. They are not boring. Next up, another team that's not boring, the Cincinnati Bengals. They will drop a 50 burger on you and still find a way to lose 9 football games. We'll see if that's changed, and that gets to your burning question. I actually essentially asked the same question, but the other side of the coin. Your burning question, is the offense going to be enough to carry the entire team, which is a direct slap in the face to the defense? My burning question was, did they do enough to help their defense this offseason? So we're asking the same question, coming at it from different perspectives. Al Golden is now the defensive coordinator, and I'll just go with your question first. Is that offense, as high-powered as it is, going to be enough to sustain their ability to win football games in the AFC North?
Well, one thing about it, they have the weapons that'll score points. Now, the burning question, an additional burning question will be, can they finish with the ball last? Right? Because if they can finish with the ball last, it gives them a chance to. I think that this offense is potent enough to be able to score on anybody. But again, this defense, and we're talking about the AFC North, which is known for defense, right? So this is why Zach goes out. He lets go of Lou Anarumo, who's really been a really good coordinator. And, he was a hot candidate for head coaching jobs. And then you go get Al Golden, who has a multiplicity level to his defenses and all the different things that he can do. But you still need to have players. You still need to have guys that can go out and execute that. And I'm just not quite sure that they're there at this time. Now, you go and you draft Shamar from Texas A&M to play opposite of Trey Hendrickson. However, you still have to figure out Trey Hendrickson and if he's going to be there long term. So I think the defense still leaves a ton more questions. However, the offense, do I think is going to be enough to carry the whole team? I'll say no. Because of how they're going to have to play. And again, we're talking AFC North. And when that weather takes a factor, you're not going to be able to play Golden State Warriors football and just throw it all up and down the yard.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't want to put Joe Burrow in a situation where every single week he's taking 50 hits to try to get the game close at the end because the defense struggled early on in that game to put them behind the 8 ball. And look, we've talked about this draft. This wasn't a draft that I loved. It could end up being great. We don't know. But in real time, it's one I had questions with. I do like the Dylan Fairchild pick. Interior offensive line, he'll probably be a day 1 starter. But let's go back to Trey Hendrickson because he's made it happy 2 off seasons in a row that he wants more money or he wants to be traded. If you're the GM, the GM has to answer to the owner. But I would imagine Duke Tobin would love to keep him around. But age 30, he's still incredibly productive. He's still a top 10 edge rusher in my mind. Do you just pay him on a 2-year deal, or are you saying, well, I don't know if you're going to be productive in year 30, 31 as you have been previously, so we'll just roll the dice and somehow this defense will get less effective as a pass rushing unit?
I think you have to look at paying him, right? Because you don't know what Shamar Stewart is going to be. You don't know. I think that's one of the biggest, anomalies in this draft. No one talks bad about his athleticism and just his natural God-given ability. But he did not produce at Texas A&M. You have to call a spade a spade. And now you spend a first-round pick on him, and then you have a proven commodity that you may not want to pay. So I think there are some other reasons as to why Cincinnati has probably been slow to pay him that we're not privy to, because we're not in the building with Trey Hendrickson on a day-to-day basis. However, if you're just keeping it on the field, I think he's earned the right to have some sort of extension done or some sort of guaranteeing his salary this year if that's what he wants. But you have to find a way to keep him because you're not going to find a better player at this point on the street, because either you're going to have to pay another guy in free agency who hadn't been in your building probably more than what you were going to pay Trey Hendrickson, or you're going to have to roll the dice and take another guy in the draft.
Exactly. And as a Steelers fan, I said it all the time, Trey Hendrickson might have been the best player on the planet every time he played the Steelers because he was lighting them up snap after snap after snap. Now, best case scenario, you get Trey Hendrickson back, Myles Murphy finally hits, and then Shamar Stewart hits, then you're winning the Super Bowl. If you get all those 3 guys playing like we know they can play, that's a Super Bowl team. I think that's fair to say. All right. Let's take a quick break here, and we'll come back, and we'll get to God's team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, talk about their burning questions right after this. right, Rand, the old burning questions mobile is headed to Pittsburgh, and I love your burning question. And I'll just say this. We talked last segment about Trey Hendrickson being 30 years old. He'll turn 31 this December. TJ Watt's 3 months older than he is, He'll turn 31 in October. And your question is this: will they pay TJ Watt, who is still one of the best, probably top 3 edge rushers in the AFC, top 5 maybe in the NFL? Will the Steelers pay him? Because for as much as we talk about their defensive line, they don't have a lot of depth after TJ Watt. They have Alex Highsmith. They have Nate Herbig as a situational pass rusher. But after that, it's wide open. So will they pay TJ Watt, the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I'll say it this way. If they don't, someone else will. So
right.
in short, pay the man. Just pay him, because he is what you think of when you think of the Pittsburgh Steelers in this era of Pittsburgh Steelers football. Like, he is an absolute dog. And when you talk about needing a play to end a game, to end a drive, you know that Trent Jordan Watt is going to go make that play for you. And so I say pay him. It makes too much sense not to. So in these words, if Omar's listening, if Mr. Rooney's listening, if Mike T is listening, pay the man.
Yeah, my mantra, in addition to your mantra of stay in your own lane, is don't overthink it. Like, you know who TJ Watt is. The funny thing about TJ Watt, and I'll ask you, I don't know if you remember this off the top of your head, but one of the reasons he slipped in the draft to the bottom of the first round is because he was considered quote unquote stiff in terms of as an edge rusher. I think we all got that one wrong. And it also just goes to show that it doesn't matter where you started, sort of where you finished. How do we miss that one so badly?
In your words, we overthought it.
Yeah.
Simple and clear. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think he was in the same draft as Myles Garrett. And so we're looking at a guy that was the number 1 pick, who's this freakish athlete, looked like a bodybuilder, type guy that could do all the athletic things. And then you look on the other side and you see TJ, and, he's still well built, but there was some stiffness and some tightness there. And everybody, we all overthought it because thinking that he has to look like Myles Garrett. And I think TJ's proven all of us wrong, except the Steelers.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and we sort of talk about this with Arch Manning, and we talked about it with Drake May a little bit in terms of having the family background of playing high-level sports and being competitive. J.J. Watt was staring us right in the face, so we sort of knew what that might look like and like that in terms of competitiveness level. And T.J., you could argue, is just as, if not more, competitive than his brother, it feels like. But either way, I'm with you. You got to pay him for the Steelers. My burning question, again, couldn't have been more obvious, is what are you doing waiting for Aaron Rodgers, or are you thinking about seriously turning your attention towards Kirk Cousins while you figure out the quarterback situation?
Again, that is the hot topic. And to me, regardless of where you go with Aaron Rodgers, you still have to have a plan for the future, because you're going to be right back down this road next year trying to answer this question, even if you go with Kirk Cousins. Because now if you go with Kirk Cousins, you're giving up a draft choice, whatever level that is, 4th, 5th, 6th, conditional 7th, whatever the case may be, but you still have to pay Kirk Cousins, right? So even if you get the Atlanta Falcons to pay half of the salary, you're still looking at paying this guy $20+ million for this year, which is double of what Aaron Rodgers is saying he's willing to take. So you're still putting yourself in a situation where there are going to be more burning questions like this come January and February.
All right, who gives the Steelers the best chance to win in 2025? Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Will Howard, Mason Rudolph? If you had to pick one guy, who are you rolling with?
If I had to pick one guy, you got to go with Aaron Rodgers. And I'll just say simply, the guy's won. The guy's won a Super Bowl. Even though that was 2010, he's won a Super Bowl. Kirk Cousins has never been there, and these young guys have never been there. So he still gives you the best chance to win. Simply put, I'll answer it that way. Aaron Rodgers gives you the best chance to win.
I'm with you. And look, man, you'll put up with a lot of off-field stuff if the on-field stuff is on point. And I think Steelers fans have not resigned themselves, but they've accepted that fact, and they just want it to be over. But I think Aaron Rodgers works at his own pace, so we'll find out when he lets us know. In the meantime, let's turn our attention to the Baltimore Ravens. And your burning question is an important one. They absolutely crushed this draft. One of our favorite drafts. We've talked about it in previous weeks, and you can check that out on the old podcast feed if you're so inclined. But it is hard to argue what they did in terms of making their football team better. Your burning question is one that I would imagine that was at the forefront of what they informed their decisions during the draft. Is this an all-in year for the Ravens? Another way, my words of putting it is this finally the year they get over the hump that is the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, I still need to see this team, how it's going to be constructed when it's finally put together. Now, conventional wisdom, you look at the names, you see the people that they brought in this offseason. And let's not even count the draft class yet. Let's just talk about what they've done in free agency, guys and veterans that they've brought in, which has kind of been the Baltimore Raven MO. But you have to be realistic and ask yourself, how much do these guys still have left in the tank? Right. And so, again, it leads you to more questions. Can Lamar put this team on his back and carry him? Does he still need help? Where is Lamar at? Is Lamar now on the other side of his greatness? We don't know. However, I think this has to be an all-in year for them, because at some point that window of opportunity closes. And you look at where San Francisco had been in previous years. They had a nice little runway there where they had a nice open window, but then that window started to close, and that forced them to make decisions on letting people go. And I think this is the year that the window starts to close for Baltimore.
The other thing compounding this is that the Chiefs crushed their draft too. So it almost like the old rising tides lifts all boats situation where, yeah, the Ravens did it better than almost anyone. The almost part is that the Chiefs are in that conversation along with the Eagles on the other side of the conference there. So I get it.
And Buffalo as well, because Buffalo was, if I'm not mistaken, that was one of I think that was your most favorite draft. And so the competition around Baltimore is getting better while Baltimore is still figuring out how they're going to get over the hump.
And realistically, in the playoffs, the issue wasn't the personnel. It's that Lamar actually had one of his worst games. So that has nothing to do with, on some level, the guys running routes or the guys blocking for you, because everything else felt pretty much the same. That said, it's hard to argue with what Eric DeCosta has done in terms of putting together a better roster. And the one question I had, are the wide receivers good enough? Because they have Dre Hopkins, and I think that's maybe one of the players you're talking about in terms of the ones they signed that isn't going to be the Dre Hopkins from 8 or 9 years ago. They have Rashad Bateman, who's a solid number 2. Zay Flowers is a number 1, but sometimes struggles with inconsistency. Last year they drafted Tez Watkins, the burner, straight-line speed guy to UNC. Didn't play a whole lot last year. They got LaJohntay Wester this year. And, of course, the backfield is Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. And Keaton Mitchell, the burner from ECU, who tore his ACL about a year and a half ago, who came back late last year. So are the weapons good enough? They're better, it feels like, than the Browns' weapons, but this team is in a different place than the Browns. Do you think the offensive firepower is enough, especially given the conversations around perhaps moving on from Mark Andrews?
I love the backfield. I love having Derrick Henry and Lamar back there, and I love that. I love that dynamic. I've always been a huge Zay Flowers fan and what he can do, especially for a guy of his size. Bateman kind of came on, in the past, last season comparative to where he had been. And then D-Hop, I think, will be 33 years old. So I think he's on the other end. And I think for a guy like D-Hop, he's chasing a ring and he wants to be a part of a championship winning team, which is why he would sign here. But I still don't know that they have the weapons on the perimeter that's going to be able to balance it out, especially if Zay Flowers continues to be in and out of the lineup with injuries.
Right. So those are the things we got to figure out. But on paper, man, this team looks better than it did last year, and that's saying a whole bunch. But so do the Bills, and so does the Chiefs. So we'll find out. Got plenty of time for that